And welcome on into a victorious edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. George Bremer, Ryan Hickey with you. Hours removed, George, from a win we obviously both thought was guaranteed, was going to happen. And we called verbatim in the fashion how the Colts were going to win. They beat the Steelers 30-13 on Saturday. And now I would say, George, we are recording this on Sunday afternoon, right before the afternoon slate of games kicks off here. So there's still a lot of games that are important to the Colts moving forward here. But I think with this win on Saturday, George, I feel very safe calling it the Colts are in the playoffs. I don't know if they'll be the 5 seed, 6 seed, 7 seed. I don't, after a win like this, I don't foresee them collapsing down the stretch like we saw in 2021. This was one of those, I think, statement wins that showed the rest of the AFC we are a playoff team this year, no matter who is playing for us, and that was tested big time on Saturday.
It's definitely a statement win. I think the way that they won, beating the Steelers down in the trenches, out-physicaling them, I think it's one of those things when you go back through this series, and we talked about it, in the week leading up to the game, Pittsburgh, the dominance that they hadn't lost to the Colts since 2008, hadn't lost to the Colts in Indianapolis since 2005, and had a huge crowd there on their side again last night. Most of those games, if you go back, it's Pittsburgh winning the physical battle on the trenches that makes a difference. And I think that's, from a Colts standpoint, I think that was even the sweeter part. Not just that you win, not just that you score the last 30 points, but that you're in the second half, you're just running the ball down their throat with your third and fourth string running backs, and they couldn't do anything on the offense. The Steelers couldn't answer. So I think it was definitely a statement win. And now we see what they do going for it. I feel hesitant to make any really grand declarations right now, just because this year has been so strange. And you still have a really tightly grouped pack no matter what happens today in the AFC. But the Colts put themselves in a really good position with this win. Got a tiebreaker over somebody in the group for once, because there's so many of them that they had dropped. And who knows from here on out? The AFC South could still be in play depending on how the Jaguars do tonight. The fifth seed, like you said, is absolutely still in play. Cleveland coming in just a half game ahead of them right now for that spot. It's going to be a really interesting last 3 weeks. That I guess that's my grand declaration. It's going to be an extremely interesting last 3 weeks, and I still think you're going to see the playoff picture change dramatically from 1 week to the next.
So a lot of my confidence comes in part from what we talked about on Thursday's preview pod, right? We both called this a playoff game. Now, both the Colts and the Steelers as well called it a playoff game. So it wasn't just us hyping it up more than it was. Both teams recognized, hey, we're 7-6. This playoff picture is a mismatch. Like, this is a massive game here that's going to really help not only, like I said, a head-to-head tiebreaker, but also give you a conference record, which is another tiebreaker, give you a big win there to again, keep yourself ahead of a lot of other teams behind you and leapfrog teams in front of you. And so when you're able to win that game too, and get now these two massive tiebreakers, that has me feeling, again, really good going forward. But it's also too, George, how they won this game. Because I think their win is it's really, if you say, what is the Colts 2023 season in one game? I think it's honestly on Saturday, what we saw on Saturday, because it's been a season filled with injuries, right? Filled with adversity where they get down early. They have to overcome an obstacle and fight and claw back. And more times than not, George, they're sitting here at 8-6. They've done that. Like, that was one where you look at the start of the game. It could have gone as badly as you could have asked. You're down 13-0 right away. You have a blocked punt. You have Matt Gay doing his best Mike Vanderjagt impersonation, kicking that ball into the locker room. I think the ball is sitting in his stall still, with how bad he missed his first field goal attempt. So you're sitting there, we talked about the importance of the first quarter against a desperate Steelers team, and you wake up 5 minutes in the game and it's 13-0. Like, holy, what are we doing here? They got injuries throughout during the game, going into the game. You're relying now on practice squad players, and guys not on your roster even a few weeks ago. And the Colts have done what they have done all season long for the most part. Overcome adversity, have different guys step up throughout the entirety of the game. Offense complements the defense complements the offense, George. And we're sitting here talking about, I'll say, an improbable win where especially with how the first, few minutes started, like there's no way they're winning this game. And now here we are sitting after the game, like they won the damn game. That I feel like that Saturday feels like an entire encapsulation of what so far the 2023 Colts season has been.
No, there's no doubt. You look at DJ Montgomery and Tyler Goodson, Trey Sermon, and what they were able to do in this game. Even Nick Cross coming up with a huge interception on defense, somebody who really didn't play for the first 2/3 of the season, but has really been taking advantage of his opportunities here in the last few weeks. Those guys stepping up, it's what we've seen again and again throughout the year, and it's crazy. I mean, especially the manner in which it happened on Saturday. I mean, like I said, you're down 13-0, and it feels like a replay of the Bengals game. I think everyone kind of had that thought going through their process. Right when it's at that point, the Colts were shooting themselves in the foot. They'd missed a field goal. They had the block punt. Everything was going the Steelers' way. The Colts couldn't get anything going, and it was just, here we go again. And then they get that. I think the play that really started turning around was Minshew kind of got out of the pocket, bought some time, and then lofted that ball to Michael Pittman Jr. for like a 42-yard gain. But even then, so that sets up the first touchdown, and you're back in the game. But on that touchdown, you lose Zach Moss, your running back. So you're down to your third-string running back now. And it's 13-7. On the very next drive, second play of the next drive, DeMonte Casey hit Michael Pittman, put him out with a concussion, and now you're down your top two playmakers. You're still down 6 points. You somehow drive down into scoring range on that drive. Looked like you scored on initially on the field. It initially looked like Goodson scored, but the replay, clearly his knee was down before the ball crossed the plane. And then you got to go back to the one. You missed the tight end in the end zone on third down. And then a horrendous drop by DJ Montgomery on fourth down. And again, you're feeling like, okay, missed opportunities, missed field goals, all the things that are going wrong, and you don't have your top two playmakers. And this is bound to be a loss. That they're going to be ruining this series here. They had the game tied. It got called back correctly for the knee being down. And now you drop the touchdown pass. It's over. And they get the ball back with 44 seconds and go 74 yards and take the lead. And who makes the two biggest plays on that drive? DJ Montgomery, the kid who dropped the ball in the end zone to begin with. I think that stretch proves your point as far as it being sort of encapsulation of this season. Guys who made mistakes came back and made huge plays. It didn't matter who was on the field. They were going to try to find a way to make it work. And honestly, we were talking about this after the game in the press room. I can't remember seeing the Steelers quit like that before. Certainly in the fourth quarter and even towards the end of the third, they did not seem to have any will left in that game.
I think you can directly tie that to coaching, one on the Steelers end, right, where they just kind of felt like, here we go, the walls are caving in. That's, again, going back to the Thursday's preview pod, that's why I felt like it wasn't a Colts thing, more why I thought the Steelers were going to win. This felt like with all the attention and noise and distractions around the Steelers going into this game and the urgency they needed to have to win it, I just felt like this, like we've seen Mike Tomlin so many times win games like this, back up against the wall, on the road, distractions everywhere. He finds a way to settle his guys, focus them, and then they come out. And again, first minutes of the game, that's exactly how it played out. You're like, oh my God, like the Steelers, they're locked in, they're ready to go. And like you said, by the end of the third quarter, it's like, this team's giving up on them. And it goes back to, again, there's so much here and so much credit we're going to give to the entire team. But it starts with Shane Steichen, where, again, instead of the, like you said, oh, here we go, it's Cincinnati 2.0, 6 days later here with the start. And with guys like DJ Montgomery, who, again, you never go into a game saying, oh, we need DJ to play well. And so you don't think in the first half here, after he drops a touchdown pass, like, oh my God, like now our hopes are on DJ Montgomery. Like it's easy to be like, if you're Gardner Minshew, if you're Shane, we're screwed. It's not our day. You have excuses built in as to why you couldn't win a game when, like you said, Jonathan Taylor, all right, already out for the game. Michael Pittman, you lose in the game. Zach Moss, you lose in the game. It's easy to be like, oh, well, it happens. Like we can't win these games when you're relying on third and fourth string running backs and receivers with also backup quarterback. Like it's built in, but Shane doesn't quit. Gardner doesn't quit. And that's also too, I think, back to coaching and also this culture on this team, George, where you just highlighted the DJ Montgomery drop on 4th and goal, that killer. And then to go right back to him like right after that and have him get a touchdown and have him, like you said, kind of get the drive going with a big catch. It just shows like the culture and belief around this team where it's like you could see some teams, some quarterbacks, some coaches be like, okay, he dropped that. We're like, you're done. Like you're done for the day. We're not going to look at you again. They went right back to him, got his belief in himself back, and now again paid dividends as to why you scores late and made some big plays. It's like it's that belief that's I think starts with the coach instilling the culture, the players buying into it. And that's why you see after a rough first few minutes, the Colts rally back and have no, don't quit. And the Steelers, by again, the fourth quarter and the game is like you can clearly see they have quit on their head coach. It's a credit to Shane, number one, but it's a credit to the entire team, George, as well. And that's why I keep on going back. Like this was like a game that I think perfectly summarizes what this 2023 Colts season is like and why, despite all the obstacles they have faced, why they're right now 8-6 and holding on to a playoff spot with 3 games to go.
And I should have put this higher up in the pod because I agree with everything you're saying, but they got the best game from Gardner Minshew of the season.
Yes.
I don't know that it's even really close. He never really put the ball in any kind of danger. I can't really remember him doing that. Especially with what was on the other side. I mean, what coming into the game, the biggest concern for the Colts, besides Tomlin's history and the Steelers' history and all the things that we have come to know about Pittsburgh over the last 17 years, was T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith and their ability to get after the quarterback. The offensive line, as you mentioned, struggled mightily in Cincinnati. They weren't alone. Everybody struggled in Cincinnati, but the offensive line in particular seemed to really stand out early. During that 13-0 stretch, 2 sacks by Watt, it looked like here we go again. But Gardner was composed. He wasn't seeing ghosts. When he was running out of the pocket, he was running with intention and he was making plays. And he put the ball on target pretty much the entire day. I think it was just a huge day from him. 3 touchdown passes tied his career high, and doing it again when the guys around him were out and there was more on his shoulders because now. There just weren't a lot of playmakers left. There weren't a lot of places to turn. Tony Sperano is the MVP. Fight me on that one. Never going to change my mind on this at this point. I do not. The job that he has done this year, I know the NFL doesn't have like the Frank Broyles Award or any equivalent of that, but if there was an assistant coach of the year, he would have to be, if not at the top, top 3 in the league. The job that he's done with the offensive line, but to get them to turn around like that from one week to the next, defensive line too. So Nate Ollie deserves a lot of credit as well. Defensive line as well bounced back in a major way, but that offensive line to go out there and run the ball 14 straight times and move the ball and bleed almost 9 minutes off the clock at the end of the third quarter and start of the fourth quarter. That's why Pittsburgh lost their will.
You're right. And I'm glad you brought up one Gardner because he deserves a lot of credit, but 2, that offensive line, George, I think that's where if you want to talk about an offensive MVP, if you will, of that game, that's who I think I would give it to those 5 guys up front because like you said, you look at the stats and you go in, if I tell you after the game, all right, no Jonathan Taylor, no Zach Moss, coming off of the Bengals game, one team's going to rush for 74 yards, 3.1 yards per carry. The other team's going to rush for 170 yards, 5 yards per carry. I would have at least assumed, George, okay, with the Steelers are the ones that ran the ball well, ran the ball effectively, and ran it down the Colts' throat versus vice versa. And that front 5 between opening holes for Goodson and Sermon all game long. Like I said, the Steelers, what was it? It was 12 straight runs, George. I think that was a number in the second half. They just ran the ball. I think it was 12 straight. So you knew what's coming. The Steelers had, again, the Steelers defense for how tough, right, how historically hard-nosed they are against the run traditionally. They were unable to stop the run even when they knew it was coming with 3rd and 4th string running backs. That's a testament to that front 5 of just imposing their will. Like I said, coming off of last week, the worst rushing defense in the league. The Bengals just absolutely stuffed them and didn't allow them to get anything going on the ground. To follow that up the next week, to just impose their will, like you said, Tony Sperano Jr., whatever he's making, George, it's not enough. You could double his salary tomorrow, and it's still not enough for the job he has done, the turnaround he has done. And in the big game where the Colts need it, they ran the ball at will. And then also, like you said, after 2 sacks by T.J. Watt for the most part, the last 3 quarters, and coincidentally, that's when the Colts scored, kept Gardner Minshew upright and kept him comfortable in the pocket as well, which allowed to see, his confidence to go there. And like you said, not put the ball in harm's way. It all started up front right there. That's where the game was won. And they deserve that front 5 deserves so much credit for just all day flat out dominating.
Yeah, and we said they've got to get better. We were talking during the week, if they're going to run the ball, it's got to start up front. The coaches had to do some things to call some better plays. Apparently, they had to go deeper into the depth chart. We didn't see that coming, but apparently that was a major critical factor here as well. But the line played great, and I think that was they had to. If the offensive line doesn't play like that on Saturday, Pittsburgh wins. I don't think there's any question about that. They came out, they got the job done. Talking with Tyler Goodson after the game, he had that 31-yard run down the sideline, and Quentin Nelson was pulling on it. And he said immediately he saw 56 out there. He saw a DB, and he's like, "Yep, this is it. It's over." Because he knew. He said, "No DB's messing with 5'6", which is true. That DB, by the way, was Joey Porter Jr. So we're not just talking about a random defensive back. Top draft pick, a guy who's certainly has history, his family with that franchise and understanding the Steeler way. But it was that kind of day for the Colts. And Goodson said that run, it hit exactly the way it did in practice, exactly the way they practiced, exactly the way they ran it all week. Is the way it hit on Saturday. So hats off to Goodson, hats off to Trey Sermon for coming in a really tough situation. And you could tell how fired up those guys were when they had that long stretch of runs. They would bust one and they would get up and they would do the celebration, and you could just feel the energy. It silenced the Pittsburgh crowd, which was not easy to do.
You're right. You're 100% right. That was also, again, part of trying to build that electric atmosphere and get yourself a home field advantage was number one, right? Get off to a hot start to slow that Pittsburgh crowd down. Did not do that. But like I said, in the second half too, which is even more impressive, especially too when you go back. Now, look, the Patriots are not good offensively. I mean, the Colts have their own slowed down more in the second half of the season compared to the first half of the season. But you go back to that Thursday night game, Steelers-Patriots. Steelers got off to got off to a 21-3 lead like ASAP. But they didn't score the rest of the game. Now, they held on to win, but the Steelers defense was able to rebound after what was a very slow start for them. I think that's why it's so important. When you look at the second half success, George, the Colts did not allow the Steelers defense, who has been able to bounce back and make plays in the fourth quarter, they didn't allow them to make a play, and they just flat out bullied them. They flat out bullied them. And like you said, you don't see that too often, but it's a credit to them. And it's also a credit to them that they didn't allow this ball hawking defense to make an impact. Again, Gardner Minshew put the ball, like you said, it didn't really put in harm's way whatsoever. The running backs, again, third and fourth string, you knew too, in that second half, the Steelers offense in neutral, you knew that defense knew going on the field, hey, we got to make a play here. Whether it's getting a fumble, whether it's, hitting, strip sacking Gardner Minshew, we ourselves got to make a play to get us back in the game. And credit to the Colts, again, backups, they didn't allow the Steelers defense to make a play like they've done so much or so often this season, but also in past seasons as well, because that offense has not been very good now for a while. But they didn't allow that Pittsburgh defense that has notoriously gotten themselves back into games and have made game-changing turnover plays. They didn't allow them to get back in the game. And the Colts defense was the one that forced 3 turnovers, that made the game-changing plays, George, and really flipped the script of what we thought going into this game with, again, traditionally how Pittsburgh's been, and then traditionally how the Colts have been defensively.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was night and day. I mean, it looked like they had exchanged roles. But I do think, too, last week we kind of said, look, the coaches were part of the problem. They got out-coached. We're talking about all the experience, Cincinnati, how deep they gone in the playoffs. You're going against a staff now, at least the head coach has Super Bowl ring, has a number of playoff appearances on his resume. And the Colts flipped that script as well. I think the Colts coaches did an excellent job, both sides of the ball. Defense really didn't have a lot to do with that 13-0 start. Let's be honest.
True.
The block punt had a huge part on it. They looked like they had a goal line stand before the first touchdown, and then the ball did break the play. And again, the replay is the right call, which we can get into that on a different pod. But you talk about dumb rules in the league and things that just don't make sense. That's a touchdown, and it is by rule. It's a touchdown. He broke the plane for a second and then lost the ball. But DJ Montgomery catching the ball, taking a couple steps, going to the ground, rolling over with it, and then losing it is not. Neither call was wrong by the rule book. It's just there are some things in the rule book that you just don't understand. Try to explain that to somebody who's never watched football. This is a touchdown. This is not.
Correct me if I'm wrong, too. On that Mitch play, on fourth down, aren't you not allowed to advance a fumble? So isn't that, because I remember they ruled on the field because Mitch fumbled and then backwards, I think it was Najee Harris. I forget exactly who picked it up and then ran it themselves. And so it's like in theory, it should be a not one but two touchdowns there in terms of the Steelers breaking the play. And then initially, before like say getting it right, it was the Colts ball. That's another dumb rule. If you fumble it backwards, like why you can't run it in on fourth down, but you can do like if that was third down and goal, you could easily have picked that up and run it in. It's a touchdown. I just to your point, stupid rule. It's like what are we doing?
There are so many rules down there in the end zone that don't make sense.
No.
Fumbling out of the end zone, which I guess they're going to look at this offseason, so that's good. That being a touchback is insane. And yeah, you're right. Had he not broken the plane, it would be the flip side of that. The Steelers would not have the second touchdown that was scored because they can't advance it. Although had they done the same thing on third down, it would have been perfectly fine. And it's a touchdown. That makes no sense.
No sense.
But I think the defense for the most part, they did what they had to do, right? I mean, they shut down the Steelers run game. You knew coming in the Steelers had to run the ball. They've done it. I think 5 of the 6 previous games, they had at least 150 yards rushing. So they were a team that had shown that they could do it. They needed to do it. Could never get the run game going. And then they got it after Mitch Trubisky and took advantage of the fact that he holds on to the ball a little bit too long and got 4 sacks. And it was just those sorts of things I think that helped. By the time the Colts ran the clock off in the third quarter, you really felt like Steelers have no chance in this game. And I don't know if I've ever seen a Colts Steelers game where I felt that way.
You're 100% right. And defensively, too, that's a big part of it. They did a really good job, especially, too, early on. Like, we talked, I think, a large part of the fast start was also from a confidence perspective, right? Because Mitch is coming in after getting booed at home. The crowd is chanting for Mason Rudolph to come in and be the quarterback. And again, it's not like he made a lot of big throws. We got 13-0. Things are going so far well for the Steelers. And you would think that just gives Mitch a lift, has him feel more confident going forward, which can then open up his game and allow him, especially as a dual threat, to make more plays, sling it, and then who knows, how that game could have went. And it's just a huge testament, kind of similarly to the Colts offense, to the defense as well, when they got down early. Again, like you said, not a large part of their fault, down 13-0, but they grabbed momentum away immediately. And they did not allow the Steelers, and especially Mitch, to get comfortable and confident. They didn't allow this run game whatsoever to get going, so you were not being able to be balanced, which you knew the Steelers were going to try to do in the worst way. Because if you got to rely on Mitch to win you a game throwing the ball 40 times and you attempted just 23 passes, but if you take away the run, you got to have them air it out. You're not going to feel good about that if you're the Steelers. And so the Colts hit them. Again, got sacks, 4 sacks. Again, they're all over right now, the quarterback. They forced 3 turnovers, 2 picks. Like, it just, they did everything you could have wanted them to do after what was a start that was not their fault. And really just came back and, like I said, made it to the point where it's still, even early on, it's still a 2-possession game where it's like, but it felt like it was a 40-point margin where the Colts had with the way they were playing late in there in that second half. I
think there were 3 game-changing plays too. Yeah, I mentioned the Minshew scramble and the big pass to Pittman, which I think was huge. Then the 44-second touchdown, which I think that first pass, the 34-yarder to DJ Montgomery, that got that started and allowed them to have that mindset. And the other one was EJ Speed's forced fumble. They're in the third quarter. It's a 14-13 game. The Colts had just punted. The Steelers get a chance to get back in it. And, he goes and he knocks the ball out, and they have to review it. And it gets overturned on review. And then what do the Colts do on the next play? 18-yard touchdown pass to Mo Alley-Cox immediately. That felt like a backbreaker because you had gone from, I'm sure the Steelers' entire locker room speech was, look, we're still in this. They've got the ball. We're going to get a stop. We're going to go down. We're going to take the lead back. We're going to win this game. And you get the stop, immediately turn it over, and now you're down 8. And honestly, I don't think Steelers were competitive the rest of the day.
You're right. And that's, too, what we talk about, George, the offense commenting the defense and vice versa. Like, that's one where it's not just enough for you to get turnovers. It's also, what are you going to do with them, right? And that's something kind of we talked about on Thursday's pod, was just the fact that it's not going to be enough for a defense just to get a turnover, because if with both offenses struggling, you get an interception when you go 3 and out, who really cares, And so that's what it was, like I said, it's massive to not only get that turnover, but then all of a sudden, boom, 1 play later, touchdown. And then you, like I said, with the way the Steelers offense is playing, I mean, we're talking about an 8-point lead, an 11-point lead going to the fourth quarter. It feels like it's insurmountable, even though you're, 2 quick scores away from tying the game or taking the lead. It's a credit to the defense too. And how about the defensive line, George? Just continuing each and every week to get it done. That has been one of the bright spots. And in area 2, going into the year, right, we kind of talked about defensively, this is a prove it year. And with a rookie quarterback, I kind of feel like that was the right approach to have of, you have a lot of inexperienced guys in the secondary, right? And they're going to have to prove it. But it's also on the edge, right? You have DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart on the inside. Obviously, those two guys are veterans, and they are really damn good players. They've proven themselves. But going into the year, you sign Ebukam in free agency. You have Dio Dengbo in the rotation. You have Kwity Paye in the rotation. Like, you have a lot of guys that have not been able to prove it and prove it consistently, but it felt like that was the right approach going to the year. If it's going to be a prove a year for everyone, especially offensively, then you know what? See what you got on the defensive line. See who can play and who can't. And so far, George, I mean, that defensive line has been one of the biggest bright spots, and honestly, one of the biggest surprises of the season where, I mean, barring something miraculous, and I guess miraculously bad in this situation, the Colts are going to set a single season Indy franchise record for sacks. Never would have thought that would have been possible going into the year, especially with how, with the Freeney Mathis era that have just tortured quarterbacks for years. Go figure, it's the Dio Dengbo, Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam led defensive end rush that's going to eventually break the Colts single season sack record. It's again a testament to them all season long.
Don't forget Tyquan Lewis coming back from
That's
2 knee injuries in back-to-back years, and a great story that he is in the middle of all this. But I thought one of the reasons that I thought the record was going to be so bad this year was I didn't have a lot of faith in the defense. I didn't see where the pass rush was going to come from. And I felt like that young secondary was going to get picked apart. You talk about rush and cover working together, and it was like, oh man, I don't know that I feel real confident about either end of this. And now, I mean, look, Chris Ballard has had some really good defensive end signings, free agent signings. Danico Autry was great.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Houston did a good job here. I think Samson Ebukam is the best of the bunch. He's come out and he has taken that next step from where he was with the Rams and the 49ers. He's leading the team, I think, with 9.5 sacks. He's on fire currently. I mean, he's had like 4 or 5 of those sacks in the last 5-6 weeks. Just getting after quarterbacks, stopping the run. He's not the typical bendy, explosive kind of defensive end that you think about when the guy that you're worrying about if you're an offense coordinator each week. But he's been collapsing pockets with sheer power most of the time. It was bull rushing people back into the quarterback. And then again, his ability to stop the run, I think has really, because Kwity Paye's always been good at that on the other side too.
Mm-hmm.
It's really made it tough on defenses because you got those two mountains in the middle of the defensive line, and then Paye and Ebukam are playing the way they are, quickly can make offenses one-dimensional. And then when they're getting after the quarterback the way they are, kind of insane. Yeah, the next sack will be an Indy record, and that is unfathomable. It's nothing you wouldn't really think about. But at the same time, the 2 rookie corners deserve a lot of credit. I know Jalen Jones got flagged again early for illegal contact, or holding. He and Juju Brents, you didn't notice them, and I think that's the best thing you can say about them. They weren't getting burnt against 2 good receivers. They weren't, much like Gardner didn't put the ball in harm's way. They never really had you worried. There's a receiver running wide open down the field. They better not hit him. They did their job, and they did it in one of the most important games of the year. So, games are only going to get bigger. We know that. You're going to play the Falcons on Christmas Eve. After that, the Raiders and the Texans at home. And if you take care of business there, you're going to play a playoff game. These games are only going to get bigger and more important. But it looks like the young guys are actually rounding into form, playing their best football right now, which is, I think, what the Colts were hoping for when they set things up this way.
That's a great point you make about not only the young guys playing well, but the moment, right? The stage, because again, we called it a playoff game. This is a standalone game for the Colts. They've only, outside of Germany, they've not had another prime time, if you will, game where everyone is watching. You're at home, you're down early. Like that's, especially coming off of last week, George, what do you talk about that Bengals loss? It could take your season 1 of 2 ways. It could take it continually to spiral down and have one loss go into 2 or 3 and snowball, or you can wake up and realize, okay, this is what playoff intensity football is like. This is how, I have to improve and get better. And they did that. They absolutely used that loss the best way they could have done it last week going into this week. Where, like I said, not only do they play a lot better, but you watch how Juju Brents, how Jalen Jones have played in that game yesterday. They weren't fazed by the moment. Like I said, two explosive receivers in Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. They weren't fazed by him, and they weren't fazed either by the fact that you're playing a nationally televised game where your playoff hopes are basically in the balance, where if you win, thankfully they did, 65%, right now you're in the playoffs, according to Next Gen Stats. ESPN has a similar model, I think it's like 63%. So you're in the mid-60s now in terms of making the playoffs. If you lose, you're in like the low 20s. So basically you have, you need a miracle to get in. So it was a de facto playoff game, and they came out and played well. And that's why going forward to the last 3 games, and even if they make the playoffs, like if they lose, it's going to okay, they lose. But I don't think it's going to be they're going to lose a game either down the stretch here or in the playoffs because the moment was too big, because they were not ready for it. This team, I think yesterday showed you, George, like they can rise to the moment, and they are not going to let the stage intimidate them. It may be just the flat out they don't have enough talent. Okay, fine, that happens. It happens everywhere in the league. But they're not going to lose a game now the rest of the way, it feels like, because they are going to get too wrapped up in the importance of the game, which is, again, for rookies playing big time roles, but even for like unproven guys as well throughout the rest of the roster that are getting now, Gardner Minshew obviously being a big example of that, like getting more playing time than they ever imagined. It's still a situation, like you see it all throughout the roster. These guys don't get phased by the opportunity and the stage that they're on, which goes back to coaching, but also goes back to their own ability to try to realize, hey, we have a big situation here. Let's capitalize on it. It's a lot of fun to watch, George. It really is.
It is, and hats off to all the young guys for coming in and making plays the way that they did. I did notice Juju once. I said I didn't notice. I did notice him once. They had run play, and he came streaking through, and it wasn't a tackle for loss. It was stoned at the line of scrimmage. And it was just funny because I talked to him during the week about, Pittsburgh's a very physical team. You've got to be a physical player. He's like, oh, I love that. It's my game. It's what I want to do. And he goes right out there. Again, one of those set the tone kind of plays there in the second half of it doesn't matter. Whoever you're running towards, you're going to get a big hit. It's going to be a big play. Hats off again to EJ Speed, who just continues to take advantage of his opportunities this year. Guy who's probably the breakout player on defense. That the knockout on that fumble was Darius. It was Shaquille Leonard-esque, and he said after the game, like it's what I learned from Shaq. And he knew he'd watched film, and he said if he was out of Najee's vision, then he was going to take that shot because he knew he'd seen on film that there was a chance there. And he executes in a huge moment. I think that's what, going back to your original point at the top of the pod, when you encapsulate the whole season, that's what we've seen again and again from this team. These guys who have broken out, these guys who are playing more than they're expected to play, they take advantage in the moment. In the most important area that they can make a play, they do. And I think that's, whether it was Goodson and Sermon, whether it was EJ Speed, whether it's Juju Brents coming back from injury, they all did something in that game that's memorable that helped this team get the win.
And that I think also brings up a good point for the Colts overall. And that's just, like you said, that they noticed that, if Najee, if he's out of your vision, he is susceptible to putting the ball on the ground, right? And that is tremendous coaching and scouting by the Colts, recognizing that and now obviously having it play out in the game perfectly. And it brings you to the point of just like, made me think like, we are seeing a lot of bad performances from this Colts team this year, right? But the one thing we can definitely say is they have been able to identify their weaknesses each and every week and make sure it doesn't repeat itself again. Like there are different games where different things go wrong. But last week, for example, right, we talked about the screen game. That defense got toasted by the screen game. That could be one where if you're the Steelers, you better run 50 screens and just screen them down, screen them to death, basically. We talked about the offensive line, like not getting a push whatsoever against the worst rushing defense and getting no lanes open whatsoever. Like anything the Colts have put on tape in a negative way throughout the season, almost immediately, maybe outside of, again, those back-to-back games against the Browns and Saints where they just got toasted on defense and turned the ball over and sort of had a repeat a little bit of both games. But other than that little mini 2-game stretch there in the middle of the year, it feels like anytime a weakness got exposed, immediately the next week they have cleaned it up, made sure, hey, the teams are watching this. They're going to try to repeat what whoever our opponent was last week, what they did that made us look bad. And they have made sure, and so far have succeeded, George, every single time they've had a weakness or a flaw on film, they have fixed it immediately. It's tremendous coaching. And also, to the players' credit, execution for not only hearing what the coaches are telling them, but then going on the field and making sure history doesn't repeat itself.
And you talk about the screen game. The Steelers tried one early, and Kwity Paye shut it down immediately. I mean, it may have made them a little less excited to call it again later.
100%.
And that was important because Paye said during the week, we're going to fix this. No ifs, ands, or buts. We're going to fix this. And he goes out and makes a play immediately. I think that's another thing you've seen under Shane. It's not just words. You know, when they're talking about what they're going to do, they're intentional about it. And a lot of times whether it's, you know, Juju Brent saying, I'm not afraid to get physical, and then going up and stonewalling the running back, or whether it's Kwity Paye saying, we're not going to get beat on the screens again, and going out and then making a huge open field tackle to make sure it doesn't happen. That's been kind of a hallmark of Shane Steichen the era so far. The guys, you know, they walk the talk. It's not just words from them. You know, that they're doing what they say they're going to do. And it was interesting. Several guys said it wasn't a fun week of practice, and it shouldn't have been because of what happened against Cincinnati. But I think that's another thing that you look, the players talk about how much they love Shane, and obviously he's a player's coach, but he's not afraid to get on them and make a week difficult. And they face some hard truths because there were a lot of flaws, especially in that third quarter against the Bengals, that were exposed, things that they'd gotten away with all year that they didn't get away with in that game. And like you said, to the coaching staff's credit, to the players' credit, they faced those hard truths and they got better, and they came out against Pittsburgh and they turned it around. And you talk about, you know, I always say, why on earth would you ever bet on the NFL? In a 4-week span now, you have had the Steelers beat the Bengals 16-10. The Colts lose to the Bengals 34-14, and then the Colts beat the Steelers 30-13. That makes no sense. All three of them in playoff contention. All three in very different places now in that playoff race, but that's the NFL for you.
You're right about that. As someone who's lost a little bit of money betting on the NFL, you're 100% right about that. It makes no sense. I have like little goosebumps, George, when kind of just talking about this, because like you go back to last year and even a little bit under the Frank Reich era, not to kind of throw him under the bus here, but it has been a situation where like we've seen a lot of talk throughout the last few years, but not a lot of change or action. And it's like almost like a point of pride of just like, it feels so good to watch a team truly get better week over week, learn from their mistakes. And like you said, not only talk the talk, I like how you put it, talk the walk, where or walk the talk. I like that. They actually implement changes to make sure what they're talking about comes to fruition on Saturday and Sundays, not just like, oh, we're going to try to, you know, stop the screen game, or we hopefully will stop the screen game. And then it's like the same thing we've seen, you know, in the last few weeks. That's been, you know, unfortunately for Frank, I think a hallmark of the last few years, like the last really 2021, 2022. And then obviously under Jeff Saturday, nothing changed. Everything got worse. So it's like, just to like sit here. And I believe this time last year, George, was the 33-0 infamous blown halftime lead. And so it's like to see a calendar year later to overcome a 13-0 first half deficit and win a big game at home. Compared to this point last year, we're talking about a 33-0 halftime lead blown, and the Colts making history in all the wrong ways. It's night and day what 1 year can do, and what one guy can do, George, coming on in and changing this entire belief system of the team, with most of the players there last year back here this year.
I didn't think about that, but you bring it up. It is the 1 year anniversary of the Minnesota game. You have 33-0 lead, and you don't obviously hold on and lose in overtime, but or losing regulation, wasn't it? I can't remember. It was either OT,
I think it was overtime. I'm pretty sure it was overtime.
Yeah, because I think it was late in overtime. I think it was getting close to a potential tie, because I think at some point I was looking up how many times there have been two ties. But you go from blowing a 33-0 lead to outscoring the Steelers 30-0 to close that game. It's kind of an interesting symmetry there.
And it goes, it is. And it just, I think it's also attached to like, we talk about it's an overall theory, right, in the NFL of how important the quarterback position is. And it obviously is important. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't matter. But I would argue, George, I think the Colts are one of the biggest examples of this. I think having a great head coach is more important than having a great quarterback. Because like you see like what the Colts are doing with Gardner Minshew here alone in this team. And again, with a lot of the contributing players this year and last year being on the roster, it's like it's sort of the same team, or at least enough to where one guy you could see makes a difference. It's not just you can't say, oh, you turn the roster over like in college football when a head coach comes in and brings all new recruits in. Shane Steichen's worked with a lot of the guys that were playing last year. And again, I think that one calendar year difference between last year Minnesota and then yesterday at home against the Steelers, it shows like when you have a great head coach, it changes so many areas of your team for the better. Like obviously quarterback, you need to have a great quarterback to win, obviously. And he makes everyone else on the offense better. And maybe if you can score 40 points a game, he makes the defense better because you're not asking them to do much. But you really see if that quarterback is injured, obviously, unfortunately, the Colts case, or if you don't want him to play hero ball, a head coach can impact so much more of the team and make so many other areas better that it really does. Like if you're the Colts, like you just have to feel so good right now going forward about where you are, in large part because I think you're seeing with the Colts, especially, but other teams as well, like how important head coach is. I think it's always kind of overlooked or maybe not talked about in the importance fashion that it should be. I think yesterday again shows you the difference one guy makes and how truly important it is to have a great head coach on your sideline. And the Colts can absolutely say they have a great head coach on their sideline, George.
There's no doubt about it. And you go back to January and that coaching search and how much, consternation and worry there was over how long it was taking and, how thorough it was. And we said, look, doesn't matter about the process. Get the right guy. That's what we said during the entire thing. I don't care if it takes a week, if it takes a month, if it takes a year, which would have been interesting playing with, no coach for a year. You got to get the right guy. And they did. They went through this thorough process. They had, 127 candidates, 53 rounds of interviews. They had quarterfinals and semifinals and finals. It was March Madness with a bracket of, and they got the right guy, and that's all that matters in the end.
Oh, absolutely. And to their credit, I mean, we were not honestly criticizing the process, but it was a frustrating process because there was so little leaks, which I think again is a good sign. But just from our perspective, trying to talk about what's going on and get information, it's frustrating. But that I think shows you kind of right there, just the process itself. I think highlighted how important the Colts knew this search was. And like you said, end of the day, all that mattered, didn't matter how long it took, was get the right guy. And now as we're sitting here 14 games into the season, George, with a rookie quarterback that's been out for the year for a while now, the Colts have the right guy. It is. And again, just going back to the point, he makes everyone on the roster better, not just the quarterback and Gardner Minshew. But I think he's done a lot of work and has a lot of guys believing on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. He's done tremendous work here for this team. And you see the difference here night and day in terms of also, too, just on the other side, seeing how the Steelers players quit on Talman at the end of the game. It just shows you how big of a difference a head coach makes. I want to ask you one quick thing here. There's been a lot of positives, obviously, rightfully so. One negative has been, I think, Matt Gay of late, who's been struggling, who missed 2 kicks on Saturday. Are you getting concerned at all about now as we get closer to obviously playoff time when these games are going to get, very close and 3 points, make or miss could be the difference here? Any concern with you at this point, George, going into the final 3 games of the year about the recent woes from Matt Gay?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you talk about how tight games get. If you do make the playoffs, you're probably going to be outdoors somewhere. There might be weather. You don't know, how that's going to affect things. You go to Kansas City or somewhere like that. It could be, I think the last time I was at a playoff game in Kansas City was -3 or something like that. And it snowed, 10 inches the night before. So yeah, the fact that the kicker's having trouble indoors right now, especially, it gives you pause. We'll see. Kickers go through these things too. While I'm saying that, yes, it bothers me, it's also like I kind of liken them to relievers in baseball. You never really know that there's kind of a different sort. There's a different personality it takes to even be in that position. And you get that with relievers. They'll be just lights out all year long, and then they'll go through a stretch where they can't get an out, and you're just like, is this guy ever coming back? And then they'll rebound. But I think given the importance right now of every unit, special teams in general, they had that great game in Tennessee. It was probably the best game, well, definitely the best game under Brian Mason, and one of the best game special teams had in a long time. Arguably, they won the game in Tennessee. But since then, they've had their shaky moments. They had their problems in Cincinnati. You had the block punt, obviously, last night, the missed kicks. I think that's something, if there's one of the three big units that you talk about right now that is a concern as you try to finish out this season the right way and get the postseason, and special teams is that unit right now.
Matt Gay's missed a kick in 4 out of the last 5 games. So it's like I said, it's now, 5 games is a big sample size. I guess I'm not pushing the panic button just yet because he's a veteran. And I do think that for someone who's made some big kicks, right? He's been on the Rams, won them a Super Bowl. Like we saw this year, the 4 50-yard field goals in Baltimore in the rain, not a great, weather ideal conditions wise, still followed through and came through. It's concerning, but I'm not pushing the panic button yet because I do think as a veteran, I think he deserves a little bit more leash and is able to bounce back faster than maybe if this was a rookie or like we saw with Hot Rod, where one missed kick kind of just crumbled his whole career. I think he's mentally tougher, and I think as a veteran kicker, you have to be, just because you go through the highs and lows more, so you know how to get out of the lows when you're in them. He's in a rut right now. Thankfully for the Colts, it hasn't really come back to bite them, which is, hopefully not, I'm not going to eat my words here next week or in a month from now if we're talking about a missed kick losing a game. So that has at least been the benefit to this team, right? He's missing kicks, and it's still, outside of last week when he missed the only kick, and that 3 points not making a difference there in that 20-point blowout loss to the Bengals. They have not allowed Matt Gay's struggles of late to get in the way in terms of them winning, which I think it is huge right now, and a testament to this team to still overcome that. It has to obviously improve, but I will give Matt Gay here. I'm not pushing the panic button, just I still have full confidence in him that if he goes out in Atlanta next week, has to kick 3 field goals, I'll still feel confident he can get it done. But it's definitely now something you have to keep an eye on. Also the thing is, I don't know what else you do this year, George. Like if he misses, let's say, a kick in Atlanta, you can't bring anyone in, right? At this point in the season?
No, and I don't know. With what you paid him, I don't know if there's anything you can do next year either. That's part of it too. I agree with you. I don't think you're pushing the panic button. He had a good year most of the year.
Right.
He's in a stretch right now where things are not good. And that first miss was extraordinarily not good. But so far he's been back on track, and he did make the final kick. So he did have 3 makes in that game. It's just It was only 60%, which is not what you want. It was also interesting when you talk about that. They missed 2 field goals. Gardner Minshew should have had 5 touchdown passes. You had the drop by Montgomery and then another one by Mo Alley Cox. So even as well as they played, there were points left on the table. But unrelated, but also related to the Matt Gay issue, the pettiness at the end of the game on both sides was entertaining to me, with Mike Tomlin calling timeouts when the game's over. The Colts take a knee and he's calling timeouts, and then Shane Steichen sending out the field goal unit to kick that last field goal. I just found that entertaining. Just wanted to mention that.
I'm with you, I'm all here for the pettiness. And you know what? I like the fact, I think it is it's silly in a way, but I think it's also a testament to the confidence of Shane Steichen when he goes, screw you. Like, you want to mess with me? Like, fine, we're going to run the score up. Here's a field goal right down your throat. Like, I think that is it's a small thing and maybe a stupid thing, George, but I'm glad you brought it up because I think it shows just again, this is a guy who knows what he's doing, is confident in his abilities. And like I said, is not going to get intimidated by a guy with, one of the best resumes we've ever really seen a head coach have in NFL history. He doesn't care. He doesn't give a what. You want to call timeouts? Bleep you. Let's Matt Gay go ahead another field goal. I love it, George. I think it's you can have that be another reason to feel good about your head coach. He doesn't care who is on the other sideline. He's going to do what he wants, and he's not going to let you bully him around or intimidate him.
No, not at all. That was an entertaining moment for me at the end of the game. So I wanted to bring that up too while we're having this discussion. But yeah, I do think you've seen that from Shane throughout the year. It doesn't matter who's on the other side. And he hasn't solved the Jacksonville problem yet. But pretty much every other game that he's faced this year, there was some kind of long running issue with the opponent. Tennessee, New England, Pittsburgh, got the job done.
Got the job done, George. A big W. So you go to 8-6, sit yourself firmly in the playoff race here. now over a 60% chance, according to most playoff models here, for the Colts to make the playoffs. We talked about after the Germany game in the bye week. Colts have to go 5-2 down the stretch here to make the playoffs to get to 10-7. Right now, George, 3-1, 3 games to go. Probably will be favored in all 3 games as well. So looking again down the stretch, Falcons, Raiders, and Texans, all 2 of the 3 at home. One last road game to go here, but in the dome. This should be, George. Again, it's getting to the point where we can talk about it more on Tuesday after these games on Sunday shake out, and we'll really get a better playoff picture or idea, I should say, of the playoff picture and where the Colts stand. This is trending, I think, Saturday, at least for me, George. If they don't make the playoffs, I'd be surprised. Doesn't matter what seed it is, but this was one of those plant your flag wins, I thought, on Saturday, sending a message to the rest of the AFC. We are here to play.
It was definitely a statement win, and the way they won it, I think was really important as well. And now, think about the NFL, and especially this year and the way the AFC is, getting a big win just sets you up for, an even bigger game next week. And so they'll go down to Atlanta now. They'll face another desperate team trying to win a division title. And it'll be I would imagine, another playoff atmosphere, another playoff-like game.
You're right. You're 100% right about that, which is only a good thing for the Colts, to where if they do make the playoffs, they already will have basically a feel of what a playoff game is like. And I really thought, like I said, you saw that in Cincinnati last week with the Bengals crowd, and they sensed that desperation that they needed to win that game. I think you saw it on Saturday as well, a playoff atmosphere on both sides. And the Colts came out not intimidated and got that big W to go to 8-6 on the season. So that'll do it for this victorious edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, or wherever you get your podcasts, same name as well. We will be back Tuesday. As George, you look at the schedule on Sunday, a lot of impactful games for the Colts. This is a great Sunday, George. Honestly, I'm so excited. We're going to hang up after this to watch these games. Number one, stress-free. And number two, now seeing if things go your way, if the Bears beat the Browns and the Ravens beat the Jaguars, like the Colts playoff chances in the 60s now could only increase. And hell, George, we could be talking about the division still up for grabs here, depending on what happens on Sunday Night Football here. So Tuesday is going to be a very fun pod, but this Sunday is going to be a fun one. Sit back, and when you take care of business, now it's a great feeling to kind of sit back and have an enjoyable, stress-free Sunday for the first time in a long time. It's tremendous.
It's definitely a different feeling. Just like we said back in training camp, going into Christmas with the division title in sight, just like we expected.
We all were over the win prediction. We both said 10-7. We both said this team is going to the playoffs and will absolutely be chasing down Jacksonville for the division lead with Gardner Minshew and plenty of other players that we didn't even hear of or think would be on the roster, contributing in a big-time December win, just like we predicted. That's why I listen to the Blue Horseshoe Pod. For these prescient predictions you get in August that are now just looking like perfection here in December. Oh, what a difference a year makes, George. What a difference a year makes. That is for sure. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you're listening on Monday, have a great rest of your Monday. We will talk to you on Tuesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.